The morning I sat in Dr. Calloway's office and heard the word arsenic, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in that stiff plastic chair, staring at the fluorescent light humming above his desk, thinking about who had access to my kitchen. The list was very short. My name is Dorothy Haines. I'm 67 years old. I taught third grade for 31 years at Millbrook Elementary in Dayton, Ohio. I know how to read people. I've spent decades watching 8-year-olds try to hide that they didn't do their homework, or that they were being bullied, or that something at home wasn't right. I thought that skill would protect me in my own house. I was wrong. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without understanding what my life looked like before it started falling apart. My husband Gerald passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast, brutal, and completely without mercy. We'd been married 41 years. He was the kind of man who left notes in my coat pockets for me to find in January that he'd written in October. He called me Dottie and meant it like a song. When he died, I thought the loneliness would simply finish me off. It didn't. But it changed the shape of everything. My son Marcus is my only child. He's 38, works in logistics, and he has his father's jaw and unfortunately very little of his father's judgment. I say that with love. Marcus has always needed someone to tell him what to do. First me, then Gerald, then his college roommates, and eventually his wife. Her name is Courtney. They met at a work conference in Cincinnati 6 years ago. She was sharp, well-dressed, and had a way of tilting her head when you talked to her that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. I noticed early on that she only did this when she wanted something. But Marcus was in love, and I remembered what it felt like to be in love, and I kept my mouth shut. They got married in a small ceremony in 2019. Gerald was already sick by then, and I remember Courtney crying at the reception with her head on Marcus's shoulder, and I remember thinking, those are real tears. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I kept giving it to her for years, like a woman who keeps feeding quarters into a machine that never pays out. After Gerald died, the house felt enormous. It's a 4-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Drive that we bought in 1989 for less than we'd believe now. Gerald had paid off the mortgage 11 years before he died. The house is mine, free and clear. And it is worth, by last year's appraisal, $412,000. I mention that because it matters. It matters more than I understood at the time. About 18 months ago, Courtney suggested that it might make more sense for me to move in with them. She framed it as concern. I had just turned 66, she said. The house was too big for one person, she said. What if I fell? What if something happened and no one was there? Marcus nodded along beside her with the expression he gets when he's already been told what to think. I told them I appreciated the thought, but I was fine on my own. 3 months later, I slipped on ice on my front walkway and bruised 2 ribs. It wasn't serious, but Courtney appeared at the hospital within the hour and used the word dangerous 4 times in one conversation. By the end of the week, I had agreed to move into their guest room, temporarily, just through the winter. I packed 2 suitcases and told myself it would be fine. That was 14 months ago. Their house is a newer build in Beaver Creek, all open floor plan and gray countertops and not a single surface that feels like anyone actually lives there. My room was at the end of the hallway. It had a good window and I tried to make it feel like mine. I put Gerald's photo on the nightstand. I brought my grandmother's quilt. I told myself I was lucky to have family who wanted me close. The first few months were uneasy but manageable. Courtney cooked most of the meals, which I thought was generous, until I realized that also meant I had very little reason to go into the kitchen myself. She had a system, she said. She liked to keep things organized. I didn't push back. I was a guest in her home. I tried to be easy. I started feeling tired in November. Not ordinary retired woman tired, bone tired. The kind that makes you feel like you're moving through water. I assumed it was grief settling back in, the way it does in the cold months. Gerald had loved fall, and the first leaves always brought him back to me in a way that was beautiful and also devastating. I thought I was just sad. By December, I had lost 11 pounds without trying. My hair, which I had always kept thick and silver and neat, was coming out in the brush in amounts that alarmed me. My hands shook slightly when I held my coffee cup in the morning, and some days the nausea was bad enough that I couldn't eat at all. Courtney clucked sympathetically and brought me crackers and ginger tea and suggested I was probably just adjusting to the change of living situation. Marcus took me to my primary care doctor in January. Dr. Calloway ran blood work and told me my levels looked a little off, but nothing definitive. He suggested we monitor it. He asked about my diet. He asked if I was under stress. I said I was managing. I went home. Things got worse. By February, I was struggling to make it to the bathroom and back without sitting down to rest. My fingernails had developed these faint horizontal lines I didn't recognize. I had a persistent headache that lived behind my left eye for 3 weeks without leaving. I lay in my bed some mornings and genuinely could not remember what it had felt like to be well, and that frightened me more than anything else. What I noticed, though, and this is where the third-grade teacher in me started paying attention, was the pattern. The worst days always followed the mornings when Courtney made my tea. She had started bringing me a cup of chamomile every morning, which I had thought was sweet. She'd bring it to my room before I got up, set it on the nightstand, say something cheerful, and leave. On the mornings, she had early work calls and skipped the tea. I felt marginally better. On the days she brought it, by noon, I was useless. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was paranoid and grief-stricken and becoming one of those suspicious old women who turn their family into enemies. But I'm a teacher. I know how to track data. I started writing it down. Morning tea. Bad afternoon. No tea. Better. Tea. Terrible. No tea. Could walk to the mailbox without stopping. I had 2 weeks of notes, and the pattern was undeniable, and I sat with that knowledge for 4 days before I could make myself think about what it meant. I didn't say anything to Marcus. I want to explain why, because I've been asked this question, and it deserves a real answer. Marcus loves his mother. I believe that. But Marcus also loves Courtney, and more importantly, Marcus needs Courtney in a way that has always made me uneasy. Not because she is unkind to him, but because he has outsourced so much of his own thinking to her that I genuinely wasn't sure anymore what he would do if I put him in the middle. I was also, if I'm honest, not entirely sure he didn't already know. I couldn't risk it. Not yet. I called my friend Patricia instead. Patricia O'Caffer has been my closest friend since we taught 2nd and 3rd grade side by side for 22 years. She is practical and fierce, and she did not tell me I was being paranoid. She listened to everything I said, and then she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Dorothy, I want you to get a camera." I bought a small indoor security camera online, the kind that looks like a phone charger plugged into the wall. I paid for 2-day shipping. I told Courtney I was ordering some vitamins. When the package arrived, she offered to open it for me, and I said I had it, thank you, and I went to my room and closed the door. I set the camera up on the bookshelf across from my door, angled toward the nightstand where she left the tea. The app connected to my phone. I tested it twice. I put my phone in my cardigan pocket, and I went to dinner that night, and I sat across from Courtney and watched her talk about a home renovation show she'd been watching. And I smiled and nodded, and my hands were completely steady. I didn't have to wait long. 2 mornings later, I pretended to be asleep when I heard her in the hallway. I listened to my door open softly, listened to the small sounds of the mug being set down, listened to her leave. I waited 15 minutes. Then I opened the app on my phone. The footage was clear. She came in holding the mug in one hand. She set it on the nightstand. Then she reached into the front pocket of her robe with her other hand, took out a small folded paper packet, the kind you'd fold from a square of regular paper, and tapped something from it into the tea. She stirred it with a spoon she'd brought in her robe pocket. She straightened up, looked at me lying in the bed, and left. I watched it 4 times. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at the cup of chamomile tea steaming gently on my nightstand, and I thought about everything I had built in 67 years, and I thought about Gerald's voice. And I thought about 31 years of third graders who needed someone to see what was really happening, and I made a decision. I did not drink the tea. I called Patricia and I told her what I had seen, and she came over that afternoon while Marcus was at work and Courtney was at a spin class. Patricia brought two things: a pair of latex gloves she'd bought at the drugstore and the name of a private lab in Columbus that did independent testing. I poured a small amount of the remaining tea into a clean glass jar. I sealed it. Patricia drove it to Columbus herself that same day. We told no one. The results came back in 6 days. I was in Patricia's kitchen when she read them to me over the phone as I sat at her table with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that I had watched her make myself. Arsenic. Inorganic arsenic, the lab said, at a level consistent with repeated low-dose exposure over a period of weeks or months. I put the phone down on Patricia's table and I stared at her yellow kitchen curtains for a long time. I had been a third-grade teacher for 31 years. I had held crying children and called parents and filed reports and stayed late and shown up early and given this job everything I had because I believed that people deserved someone in their corner. I had been a wife and a mother, and I had sat with my husband while he died, and I had not fallen apart. I had survived every hard thing my life had handed me with my dignity mostly intact. And someone had been putting poison in my morning tea. Patricia drove me to an attorney's office the following week. I told Marcus I had a doctor's appointment, which was also true because I stopped at Dr. Calloway's office first and told him everything and asked him to order specific blood work for arsenic exposure, which he did, looking at me with an expression I will not forget. The results confirmed what the private lab had found. He reported it. That was when things moved quickly. I need to tell you what happened with Marcus, because it is the part that cost me the most. When the police first came to the house, Marcus's face did something I had never seen it do before. It collapsed, not into guilt, but into a kind of terrible confusion, like a man who has just been told the floor he's been standing on was never solid. He looked at Courtney. He looked at me. He looked at me. He looked back at Courtney. And Courtney, to her credit, did not break immediately. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said the lab must have made an error. She said she couldn't believe anyone would accuse her of something like this in her own home. Then they showed her the footage. She didn't say anything for a long time after that. And then she said something that I have turned over in my mind every day since, something that I think revealed more about who she is than anything else ever could. She said Dorothy was going to leave everything to Marcus anyway. I was trying to move things along. She's 67. She was going to need a care facility eventually. The house was just sitting there. Marcus stood up from the table and walked out of the room. I heard the front door open and close. I don't know how long he stood on the front porch. I didn't go after him. Some things a person has to stand in alone. What the investigation found, as it unfolded over the following months, was that Courtney had not acted impulsively. She had researched. She had been deliberate. Inorganic arsenic is difficult to taste in chamomile tea, which she apparently knew. The amounts she had used were calibrated. Enough to make me progressively sicker, sick enough that a care facility would become the only reasonable option, but not enough to cause a sudden death that would trigger an immediate investigation. The plan, as the prosecutor eventually described it, was for me to deteriorate slowly, to require more care than Marcus could provide at home, to move to a facility, and, given my age and declining health, to not be around for very much longer. The house would pass to Marcus. Courtney had already begun researching how to sell it. She had been doing this for approximately 4 months before I started keeping notes. Courtney was charged with first-degree felony assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm, as well as additional charges related to the premeditated nature of the poisoning. She entered a not guilty plea, which lasted until her own attorney apparently had a direct conversation with her about the footage and the lab results and the documented pattern of exposure. She changed her plea. At sentencing, the judge noted the extended duration of the poisoning, the deliberate choice of a vulnerable victim, and the violation of a familial trust relationship. She was sentenced to 18 years. I was not in the courtroom when the sentence was read. I had given my victim impact statement the week before, and I had said everything I needed to say. And I didn't feel that I needed to watch. Patricia came with me when I gave the statement. I wore the blue blouse Gerald always said matched my eyes. I moved back to my house on Sycamore Drive in August. Patricia helped me open all the windows, and I stood in the kitchen that Gerald and I had tiled together in 2003, and I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and I drank it standing at the counter in the afternoon light. Marcus calls me every Sunday. Our conversations are not easy, and I won't pretend they are. He is not a man who processes things quickly, and what he is processing is enormous, not just that his wife had done this, but the question of what he had noticed and not noticed, what he had allowed himself not to see. I don't have an answer for him about that. I don't think there is a clean answer. I love my son. I also know that love is not the same as trust, and I am rebuilding one while trying to preserve the other, and it is slow work. I changed my will. I did this with my attorney 2 days after I moved back home, and I want to be clear that I did it not out of anger but out of clarity. Gerald left me this house and everything in it, and I will decide what happens to it. That is not negotiable, and it was never anyone else's decision to make. I want to say one more thing, and I want to say it directly, because I know some of you watching this are older women living with family members, or considering it, or being gently pressured into it. I want you to hear this from someone who has stood exactly where you are standing. Your instincts are not paranoia. When something feels wrong, it is worth paying attention to. Even when the person doing the wrong thing is someone you love, or someone you've invited into your home, or someone who brings you tea in the morning with a smile on their face. You taught yourself to survive everything that came before this. You can survive this too. I'm 67 years old. I have a house on Sycamore Drive with Gerald's handwriting on the inside of the kitchen cabinet where he marked how tall Marcus was every birthday until he was 14. I have a best friend who drove a jar of tea to Columbus without being asked. I have 31 years of third graders who needed someone to see them, and I saw them, every single one. I plan to be here for a very long time. If this story helped you feel less alone, or helped you recognize something in your own life that needed to be looked at more closely, please share it. There are people in your life who need to hear it. That's why I'm still telling it.